Tonight we're in Cumbernauld, once called the ugliest town in Scotland, but now earmarked for major regeneration and redevelopment. It's all change here, and also in Bute House, where First Minister John Swinney has unveiled his new cabinet. So what matters most to the people who live here? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland giving you the chance to put your questions directly to the people in power, answering them on our panel this evening. The leader of the Scottish Labour Party and MSP for Glasgow, Sarwar. Under his leadership, the party are polling at the highest level in a decade in what one newspaper called a seismic reversal of fortunes. Angela Haggerty is a journalist and broadcaster, a former news editor at the Sunday Herald. Angela grew up in a Labour-supporting family, but is a long-time supporter of independence. From the Scottish Conservatives, Jamie Greene is MSP for West Scotland. Jamie's the former party spokesperson for Justice. He was one of only two of his party to vote for gender recognition reform legislation. Also with us from the SNP, the local MSP for Cumbernauld and Kilsyth, Jamie Hepburn. Jamie was appointed the Government Minister for Independence just over a year ago, a new role created by former First Minister Humza Yousaf. And finally, the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats and MSP for Edinburgh Western, Alex Cole-Hamilton. Alex has recently said he firmly believes his party will oust the SNP as the third party at Westminster. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome also to our studio audience. It's our first time here in Cumbernauld. It's great to be with you this evening. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you are in Scotland. BBCDN is the hashtag you need right now on social media. And our podcast of the show will be available for you to download straight after this broadcast. So let's get started tonight. Our first question comes from Emma Fraser. Emma, evening.
Good evening. John Swinney has asked the unionist parties to put to one side the constitutional issues. How can he ask this when he stated in his acceptance speech that he will continue to work towards independence?
Thank you, Emma. Well, we've got the Minister for Independence, Jamie Hepburn, here with us tonight. Well, Minister for Independence tonight. Will you be tomorrow?
We shall see, Steve.
Independence frustratingly close, the outgoing First Minister told us. Was he right?
Well, we know that there's still a job of work to be done to persuade the people of Scotland. The big impediment, of course, is the refusal of the unionist parties to recognise that the Scottish Government has a mandate for a referendum and to grant it, and we could really put it to the test. But we will continue to advance the case, and in relation to the proposition and the question, I see no dichotomy between, on the one hand, having a pro-independence government, continue to advocate for and continue to work towards independence, but recognising that we are in a parliament minorities, that there will be areas, that's clearly an area where we don't all agree, but there will be areas where we should come together. We should be able to see on an issue-by-issue basis for the betterment of Scotland to be able to work together towards that end.
But the question is about
that's incumbent on all of us to do that.
Yeah, the question's about the Constitution. So they're all supposed to set it aside, but you're not?
No. I think the fundamental point that was being made is that in recognition of the fact that we now don't have a government that commands a majority in the Scottish Parliament, we are a parliament of minorities, that it is incumbent on us where we can agree to come together in dialogue, of course still robustly debating issues, but making sure that where it is possible we work together and we make the best possible decisions for the people of Scotland. Of course, the SNP and the Scottish Government still continues to believe that independence is the best way forward for Scotland. I believe there's plenty of international evidence for just around us, countries of 5 million in north of Europe with much higher living standards in Scotland, much healthier, wealthier, fairer, happier societies than the UK. Those are the countries that I aspire for Scotland to be. We can achieve that with independence. But yeah, where we don't agree on that issue, but where we can agree, we should come together.
Sarwar.
Look, I think politicians should always try and work together where there is a national consensus, but I do find something quite laughable about one of the architects of divisive politics in Scotland now pretending he's the great unifier of the nation. Let's be really clear, John Swinney is the continuity candidate. He's been at the heart of this SNP government for 17 years. He's been at the heart of the SNP leadership for the last 40 years. And what he is offering is better management of his political party. It's got nothing to do with actually running the country and delivering for the people of Scotland. We've heard nothing from John Swinney over this last period about what he's going to do to bring down, for example, NHS waiting lists, when there are almost 100,000 people in Lanarkshire alone languishing on an NHS waiting list. He said nothing about what he's going to do to try and lift people out of fuel poverty, when almost 25% of people in Lanarkshire live in fuel poverty. He said nothing about what he's done nothing about what he's going to do to improve our education standards, when on his watch, when he was the worst education secretary in the history of the Scottish Parliament, you see now Scotland falling down the international PISA scores. So, of course, on individual issues that come before the Parliament, or individual pieces of legislation, we'll look at what they will mean for Scotland, and we will obviously vote in line with the national interest. But let's not pretend that this is some kind of change. Let's not pretend this is day one of a new SNP government. This is 17 years of failure, and the people should have decided who runs this country, not a handful of SNP MSPs doing a backroom deal stitch-up. It's for the people to decide, and I can't wait for that election to come so the people can have their voice, and we can change our country for the better.
John Swinney says this is a reset moment for Scotland. Man in the striped shirt at the back. Yeah.
Sorry to blurt out there, but are you going to support the campaign to keep Grangemouth oil refinery open?
Yes.
You talked about fuel
Simply yes.
poverty. We need to keep that strategic asset open for Scotland. It's a regional issue here in Cumbernauld. There are 5,000 jobs depending on it, plus other jobs. And we need it. It's a national asset.
Let him answer the question.
Your party is not supporting
a really important question, and
neither is the SNP.
And the simple answer to that is yes. But how are we going to support the Grangemouth workforce, and how are we going to make it sustainable for the future? It's going to require UK government intervention and Scottish government intervention, not two governments fighting with each other, but actually two governments working together with the local businesses, with the trade unions and the workforce to support them in the short term so their jobs can survive, and then work with them to give a managed, orderly transition. So we do not repeat what Margaret Thatcher did with the mining industry.
Please don't shout it. That's not what the question was. The question was about independence and how the other parties can work together. Gentleman in the middle with the glasses. On you go.
I don't know how any of you can say that you are going to work towards independence. The Supreme Court in 2022 ruled that it's impossible for the Scottish Government to hold a Scottish referendum legally on its own. And we've got a Conservative government in Westminster who's never going to give you the legal powers to do so. So how can you work towards independence? You're at a dead end.
Angela Haggerty, how do you see this? I mean, you've been a long-time supporter of independence. Do you believe that John Swinney is the man who can shift the dial on this?
As a supporter of independence, I'd like to hope so. I'm not quite so sure, though. As the man there said, we are at a dead end with independence strategy. The strategy post-Brexit was to seek the Section 30 order to have another referendum. Westminster has said no, which I must say, and we'll keep pointing this out, I think that is outrageous. The SNP has won all of the elections since 2014. This is European elections and council elections, Scottish elections, general elections. The SNP has won them and made it quite clear that the second referendum was part of their mandate. So I think for Westminster to just continually say no, no, no is quite outrageous. And I think that also we have, polls are showing that we have about 50% of the population in favour of independence and 50% opposed. So we hear politicians in this country arguing all the time. Unionist politicians will keep saying that we shouldn't be talking about independence. We had a referendum. Take this off the table and focus on the bread and butter issues. It's too divisive, etc. Well, the fact is we have a divided population. We're 50-50 here. This matter is not settled. And I think the country would do better one way or the other, whether we become independent or whether we stay within the union. But if we could get a better consensus than we have right now, then I think Scotland would perform better. How do we
settle this matter, Angela?
Well, we're being told that we can't have a referendum. So what do we do to settle that matter? And I would say to the unionist parties as well as to the pro-independence parties, if you want Scotland to work for all, you have a duty to the people who disagree with you as well. If you're a unionist, 50% of the population at the moment disagrees with you on this subject. And you have a duty to listen to them as well as to those who agree with you. So all of you, independence supporting and union supporting, need to be talking to each other about how we find the route out of it.
Right, let's talk to the audience. Man in the blue sweater. Yeah.
Yeah, the issue of independence is not really to do with party politics. The fact is that the population have been convinced about the arguments put forward, and the fundamental issue behind that is the economy, because it's not been proven to us that we can afford that. And I think unless someone makes that convincing argument, the swing voters will never change.
Well, that may be the job that Kate Forbes is setting out to do from today. Man on the end with the beard. Yes, on you go.
Jamie Hepburn says that the Scottish Government has a mandate. When Rishi Sunak was forced upon the United Kingdom as the second unelected Prime Minister since Boris Johnson left, John Swinney said he had no mandate and there must be a general election. Surely, we've now had the second unelected First Minister of Scotland. There must be a general election, as he has no mandate.
Thank you. Man with the glasses in the middle here? Yes.
If Angela's saying we're heading down an end road, why are we hemorrhaging money towards independence and not using it for essentials like the NHS, schools and things like that?
Thank you. And lady just down on the floor here. Yeah, on you go. Yeah, on you go.
Oh, hello. I was just going to say, we won't, as a country, function properly unless we get our independence. It's just a thought.
Jamie Greene.
Well, the original question from Emma was how on earth can John Swinney expect to reach out to other parties across the political spectrum and say, come and work with me, when he's been at the very heart of government for nearly 2 decades now. His hand is all over government policy and he is responsible for the SNP's track record in Scotland to date. Now, I think one thing that he could do straight away is tomorrow morning John Swinney could wake up, and I'm afraid to say this, Jamie Hepburn, but sack this gentleman for the Minister of Independence. That would be a very good step towards proving to the unionist parties that he's willing to work constructively. It's also a fact that it would be proof that he's willing to use the whole resource of government and the Scottish Civil Service to make people's lives better in Scotland, to improve the NHS, to focus on education, to deliver ferries to our island communities, and as the gentleman said at the back, to make Scotland's economy robust, attract new businesses and grow our job creation. Those are the things that the people I'm speaking to want the Scottish Government to focus on. They aren't interested in the Minister for Independence producing white papers that nobody reads. They want John Swinney to focus on the difficulties that he has over the next 2 years. If he reaches out on an issue-by-issue basis, of course, I think people want politicians to work together where it's appropriate. I think sometimes it's quite helpful. We've proven in the past we can work together on specific issues where it's a sensible thing to do so. I think the public are sick and tired of the bickering between politicians on the Constitution, actually, and they just want people to go on with the day job.
Jamie Greene, once you sacked from your job, if tomorrow that post disappears, does that mean independence is downgraded?
No.
If you're not in post at this time tomorrow?
No, I disagree. Independence will remain a priority for the Scottish Government, of course. Well, there's been quite a few things said there that I must respond to. The first that was made mention of in terms of the First Minister not having a mandate and being unelected. Well, actually there's a difference in terms of the manner in which the First Minister of Scotland is appointed and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is appointed. The First Minister actually was voted for yesterday because the 4 parliamentarians, myself included, on the stage today, all had a vote in terms of who is nominated for First Minister. It
was a coronation, Jamie. It was a coronation.
Directly elected. There's a fundamental difference. In terms of the point that was made about the economy, well, let's look at the economy of Scotland, and indeed the United Kingdom right now. The United Kingdom's economy has been trashed by the United Kingdom government. We saw the disaster zone of the Truss quartering mini-budget a couple of years ago, which has sent interest rates through the roof, has increased the cost of living pressures that each household in Scotland faces, and it's through a government we haven't elected. And the idea that Scotland, an advanced economy, couldn't afford to sustain itself, I'm afraid to say, is frankly nonsense. If Scotland can't be independent, then I'm unclear which country aspiring to independence this world couldn't afford
Lady in the yellow top.
I voted for independence and I was disappointed when we didn't get it. I voted leave for Brexit and then I was, oh my gosh, what have we done? So what would eventually happen if we went for independence? You've just said the economy's been trashed. If we were to go for independence, do you really think Scotland would boom?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. I mean, you take the point there. Brexit, again, forced upon the people of Scotland, something we didn't vote for. It's a market 7 times the size of the United Kingdom market. And if we were independent, we would be able to access that market again. Independence in Europe is redolent with opportunity for Scotland, and I think it's one we have to embrace.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
there are young people who will cast their first vote in the Scottish parliamentary elections in 2 years' time who have known nothing but this debate. They have known nothing but SNP rule.
Yeah, they all support independence, of course, Alex.
They've known nothing but the inadequacy of ministerial attention that has been so focused on this one divisive aim that they've seen their schools fall down the international rankings. They've seen their families not be able to get a GP appointment at the first time of asking. They've been unable to access an NHS dentist locally, and they've seen child poverty, this thing that we are led to believe is John Swinney's guiding mission. The dial not moved on at all in all of those 17 years of SNP rule. Now, the focus of this government should be on the people's priorities. I understand that when it won its first majority, we had to have that discussion. That discussion took place. But I'll give you another fact. So long COVID, people suffering from long COVID, there are nearly 200,000 people suffering long COVID in Scotland right now. That's the biggest mass disabling event since the end of the First World War. Jamie Hepburn's Department of Independence was given £20 million to prepare for an independence referendum that did not happen, whereas people suffering with long COVID were given half of that.
Yeah, but of course that money was reallocated. Who's paying for that?
You'll have your chance. You'll have your chance.
Yeah,
that shows the measure of ministerial attention on the warning lights on the dashboard of public policy, crying out for this government's attention. No wonder that Scotland's in the shape that it is right now. It's time we had an election. It's time we got change.
Right, but we must be factual. Of course, that money was not utilised in the referendum because these parties denied that referendum.
And actually, did you get the white papers for free? Your civil service department is free, is it, Jamie?
Alex, let me make this point, is that you've just talked about a generation of young people who've grown up since the time of the referendum. That's a generation of young people who've not had their chance to have a say in the future of this country.
And they are going to send
that's a generation that supports...
Are you afraid of an election, Jamie? Are you afraid of an election? Sounds like you are.
I don't fear an election.
So when Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney and every other senior SNP member complained about change of leadership in the UK government and demanded there must be an immediate general election, and as was said in the audience, are you afraid of a Scottish election?
No,
what are you afraid to take to your track record to the people that are paying your salary?
We have a 5-year fixed-term parliament. Everyone knows that when
you can have the votes.
Everyone
knows that when you vote for a Scottish parliament, it's a 5-year fixed-term parliament. And I'm afraid to say...
I'm afraid you're running scared of the electorate.
Maybe your constituents are different than mine. I am not being inundated with emails from my constituents saying, we demand 2 elections
Let's
this
find
year.
out. We've got constituents, we've got audience here tonight. Lady in the white top there. On you go.
We're now 10 years on from the initial independence referendum, one which I wasn't able to vote in because I was too young at that point. So
Are you desperate for a vote on it?
I'm not desperate for a vote, but I would like to be convinced by the government. I have several other issues that the government's failed on in the 10 years since this referendum, and I think that independence has just dominated the debate and it's overshadowed so many other problems. So I wouldn't be filled with confidence in having an independent SNP government when they can't run the devolved problems that they have in their hands just now.
Thank you. Man in the middle.
The unionist parties are saying you've already had your referendum. We had a referendum on the common market and we voted to go into the common market. Then the unionist party said we don't like the common market, we'll have another referendum. But they won't let Scotland have a second referendum. They're hypocrites.
Thank you. And lady down here. Yeah.
You're saying that the new people coming in for the next general election are going to be 17 years old. In the last 17 years, you've had horrific education, horrific NHS. They're not seeing anything positive here. Yeah. There needs to be change, and there's not change.
And lady just right up at the back as well. Yes.
So, as someone who did vote yes to independence, and like some audience members, I was quite disappointed we didn't get it. Looking forward for the next generation of people, I just don't know how many times we could be told no, or that it's something that we can't vote for. So at what point do we set it aside? At what point do we give up? Do you see that in SNP's future, giving up on independence, or is that all the party stands for?
No, of course it's not all the party stands for. I mean, the party fundamentally believes in the betterment of the lives of people of Scotland. I think we've achieved much in that regard. The point that nothing's been achieved in education. Well, why is it then that we have record numbers of young people in positive destinations?
Answer that lady's point there about how do you move the dial on this?
Well, the question was whether or not we have other priorities, and I'm responding to that by making the point that we have record numbers of young people in positive destinations.
Why don't you listen to this young lady who thinks otherwise?
Of deprived communities
Scottish
now
colleges
at university.
Ruined
These are educational achievements. We have 100,000 fewer children in poverty in this country as a consequence of decisions made by the Scottish Government
hold that
with
for
limited powers.
a second, because
Those are
where we are right now sets us up very nicely, actually, for our second question of the night, which comes from John Patterson. John.
What can politicians do to reduce the toxicity in public discourse?
Thank you, John. You didn't just make that question up on the spot. You did hand it in to us a little bit earlier. Alex Cole-Hamilton, John Swinney, when he was sworn in, made the gesture of walking up to you and shaking your hand in the chamber. Will you take that invitation from him to work with him? Will you take his hand politically as well and work alongside him?
Well, firstly, just to recognise the question, I think that our politics has become toxic, and I hold my hand up. There's been times I've not covered myself in glory in that, or my party has either. But I think we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard and raise the standard of public debate. I was glad when John shook my hand yesterday, and I take him at his word that he wants to turn down the heat on the discourse, and it's right that we should do. I mean, I'll go back to and say that I think the first thing we need is an election. If we don't get that, Liberal Democrats will be grown-ups, and we will always seek to find common ground with our political adversaries of the reasons why we're in politics, the instructions you gave us when you sent us to Parliament, which is to improve our local access to healthcare, which is to improve our kids' schools, to give kids a guaranteed entitlement to youth work, or take the sewage out of our rivers. These are the priorities that keep me awake at night. If we can get past the constitutional baggage, lay aside the divisions of the last 17 years, then of course I think we would be failing the people in this audience, we'd be failing everyone who's looking at our Parliament if we didn't act like grown-ups and act in the public interest.
Anna Sarwar, can you work with John Swinney to take the toxicity out of Scottish politics?
Look, I mean, I've always campaigned for pulling our country together and challenging the high levels of prejudice and hate we see in our society. And of course, on individual issues, we will work constructively.
He says it's never been worse in Scottish politics in his memory.
Well, he's right, but he's part of the architect of that division. If we're honest again, like I said right at the start, he himself said that he needs to change, and he's been one of the very worst in terms of behaviour.
Do you need to change as well?
Himself. Look, I actually genuinely believe, and I think the polls bear this out, I think results in local by-elections, including the Rutherglen by-election, bears this out, that actually it's only the Scottish Labour Party I lead that is genuinely trying to reach out across the divide on the Constitution to try and build together a majority for change. Because I think the lady at the front makes a really important point. We've got to be really honest about what's happening with education across our country. In North Lanarkshire alone, there are 200 fewer secondary school teachers on the SNP's watch. So let's not pretend somehow
under a Labour-controlled council.
Well, who sets their budget, Jamie? Let's also remember that you are the local MSP for this area who has voted for £250 million to be cut from North Lanarkshire's budget. So you should be apologising to the audience today rather than trying to do some kind of grandstanding, because it's your votes that have decimated services. But how are we going to change? Look, I don't support independence. I don't believe in a referendum right now. But I accept that there is a fundamental majority in this country, not a consistent majority for independence, not a consistent majority for a referendum. But let's not kid ourselves on. There is not a majority for the status quo either. We are currently gripped by a UK government that is destroying communities across every corner of our country, including here in Scotland. But we have the misfortune in Scotland of not having just one failing government. We've got the misfortune of two failing governments. Both governments that play off each other, that play off the constitutional divide, because they'd rather have an argument about processes and referendums than have a debate about what's happening in our NHS, what's happening in our schools, what's happening in our economy, what's happening with skills,
and you
what's
can
happening in our criminal justice system.
Work together on that, though. You can work together on that.
On all of those issues, I make an absolute pledge that we will pull our country together to make sure on those issues...
But will you work with other parties on that?
Look, absolutely. On individual issues, I will work with any political party on good ideas, because we all have an equal stake in making sure we maximise the best outcomes for people across this country.
Because you could be working with him in 2026.
And I genuinely, I've said this repeatedly, I couldn't care how you voted in the last referendum. I don't care how you'd vote in any future referendum if one was ever to come in the future. I've made my position clear. I don't support independence. I don't support a referendum. But do I think this is as good as it gets? Do I think all we can live with is managed decline of our nation? No.
All right,
I know we have
the skill and talent. Lady in the back row.
Let's pull together and deliver that together.
Polarisation of politics.
Hi, so one of John Swinney's kind of themes of his speech, actually considering toxicity in Scottish parliaments, was about accountability and about how he took accountability himself there for maybe his past behaviour. You've called him an architect of the toxicity that we're currently in, and he owned up to that and said, I'm willing to go forward without that. Now, accountability is a big thing. You have an accountability, as you've just said, to all of your constituents, no matter which way they voted and who they voted for. And I can't help but notice Alex Cole-Hamilton immediately said, I've had my own issues in the past, I own up to that. Mr. Sarwar, you didn't. You just deflected the question immediately. I don't see accountability from you at all, I'm afraid.
Well, to be honest, in the last Parliament, I chaired a cross-party group, and I did at the start of this Parliament, which was about bringing people together across every single political party to challenge the divisive rhetoric that pursues prejudice and hate in all its forms in all of our communities. I have always done that in politics. Of course, in individual debates, of course, in individual arguments, I will have given back as good as I've got. I completely accept that. But I think people can see from my own record, from the way I operate, from the way I've worked cross-party around those issues, that I am someone that believes in all of us, not in us versus them politics. I'm sick of the us versus them politics.
Man there, yes.
Yeah, I completely agree that the SNP are the architects of the divisive language that we see. It wasn't long ago that Humza Yousaf stood up on a platform and said he wanted to make Scotland Tory-free. Nicola Sturgeon said that she detested Tories. So I guess the question for Jamie is, how would you go about mending that? And do you regret the language that your party's used in the past, particularly around the second biggest party in Scotland?
Yeah, John Swinney said that he is going to change as a leader and as a person. Does the SNP have to change in its language, things like that?
Well, look, I think we should be not so disingenuous about the rhetoric about a Tory-free Scotland. That was very clearly in the context of trying to ensure that we don't have Tory MPs elected.
We have a democratic, it at the time, Jamie.
And I'm defending it now, Stephen, because I think there's a difference between saying, actually, you know, it's a contest of ideas. We stand in an election. Frankly, I want to see the SNP winning those seats. It's not a surprise. However, the fundamental point is, yes, of course, in terms of parliamentary discourse, we should be, and I've been guilty of it. I quite agree with the point that's made. I didn't hear Anna saying he has to step up and do better, and with the greatest of respect, and as I think we can all see, sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes your conduct of First Minister's questions would not quite reach. No, it would not quite reach the standard.
I'm not sure. I sat in this video with your Westminster leader who called out a Conservative Party candidate knowing full well he'd be attacked. That's the level of debate you're
I'm going to finish the point I was making, which actually is probably the simplest way to say, yeah, we do need to up our game. We do need to engage in better discourse. I've been guilty of not doing as well as I can in that regard. The First Minister has made that point. It's incumbent on all of us to make sure.
How are you going to do things differently moving forward then?
Well, probably not trying to talk over each other would probably be a good start. And I've already done that as well tonight, for which I apologise. So, you know, it's about how we conduct ourselves in public life. It's about the dialogue we use. Of course, there should be a contest of ideas. Of course, we should be prepared to debate the big issues, including the constitutional question. But let's do it in a respectful manner.
Right, let's find out what the audience think about all this. Lady in the red, right in the middle here. Yeah.
Regarding coming together, showing respect to each other, I think it would be very difficult for the SNP and government at Holyrood to show a lot of respect to the unionist parties, and especially the Conservatives, who have trashed our economy, who have really behaved in such a deplorable way during COVID in Westminster. And it's very difficult to lift the shadows from that and try and respect them, because it's shocking, their behaviour during the COVID. And the Prime Minister, the Prime Ministers that have been down in Westminster during these very turbulent times for us all. Everyone's suffered. And the situation is we're now asked to show them respect. Very difficult.
Okay.
So I understand the situation the SNP's in.
Thank you. Man in the white shirt.
Anna Sarwar's answer gave, in my view, an indication of the problem. In his answer referred to prejudice and hatred, very much as Hamza Yusuf used to do all the time. And in my view, party politics has become really tribal, and they use the cheap trick of smearing opposing views with which you don't agree, as being bigoted. And that leads to a part of this toxicity in debate.
Thank you. Jamie Greene.
I think politics has become a depressing place to be. It's become a depressing thing to watch and certainly to be part of. This is my second term in Holyrood, and I thought long and hard about whether I would stand for a second term at the last election. And I think what became quite obvious in the last Parliament is, in a minority government situation, the government was forced to work with other parties. And indeed, other parties could work together to hold the government to account, and we did that on a daily basis. Every vote, there was jeopardy involved. It felt like the Parliament was really achieving something in that respect. I have to say, the last 3 years have been dismal in Holyrood. Dismal for us in it, and dismal for the public watching it, going, what is devolution about? We're approaching the 25th anniversary of devolution, and I think the Scottish population will rightly be asking is, what are we getting out of Holyrood? Are we getting everything out of our political system? Are they actually making any changes to our lives for the better?
So do you think a minority government could actually be good for the discourse?
Well, Holyrood was designed for minority governments after all, and what we saw over the last couple of years with the Greene coalition is that every opposition idea, every opposition amendment, every opposition motion, every amendment to legislation was defeated down from day one. There was no compromise, there was nothing constructive about any of the last 3 years, and frankly it's been a really depressing place to be. I would like to think, and I will take John Swain at his word on this, if he's willing to make sure that the next 2 years of Parliament delivers for the people of Scotland, then that's great. But given his 17-year track record at the heart of government, I'm afraid he might talk the talk, but whether he walks the walk is a completely different matter. We need to detoxify politics, and that involves respect. Respect for each other, respect for differences of opinions, our different views, because we will all have different views on Brexit, on the Constitution, on whether we support Labour, Conservative, SNP. And I think the problem is it's become so bitter and so horrid. And people out there in the real world don't really care about politicians bickering amongst themselves. They want to see them get something done. They want to see improvements to their
Given
lives.
all that and what you said and the way your own party treated you over gender recognition, you're going to stand again?
Well, I mean, that's up to my local voters if they'll have me back. I mean, I genuinely want to see politics do better. You know, I really do. And I think people I speak to want to see politics do better. I think there should be the ability to disagree with each other in a respectful way. In fact, it's really important we disagree, because the opposition's job is to hold the government to account. And I feel personally that we've done that well over the last couple of years. But the gentleman's absolutely right. When government and the First Minister and former First Ministers are using toxic language, then that permeates through government, and it permeates through social media, and it permeates through their supporters and followers. And that creates a very toxic environment. We cannot grow up in a country where young people think that it's okay to hate other people because of their political views. Okay. That's got to end. We've got to do better than that.
Okay, Anna Sarwar.
Can I just pick up what the lady rightly said right in the middle? I think we've got to separate what is rightly asking tough questions, exposing what you believe to be government failures, questioning some character decisions. I think you can see that with around the Rwanda policy as one example. I think all of that is absolutely legitimate. I think the starting point, though, if we're talking genuinely about changing the discourse of politics, is we've got to start using language like traitors. No one in any political party is a traitor. We should stop talking about betrayal of the people of Scotland. No one in any political party believes in betraying the people of Scotland. And we should also not question anyone's love for Scotland or somehow downgrade their willingness to want to deliver for Scotland.
I agree.
If we can move on that part and say, you know what, we might have political disagreements, we might have robust debates, we might ask difficult questions, we might get some really difficult responses back from ministers to those difficult questions, but we're not going to question your loyalty, we're not going to question your Scottishness, we're not going to question whether you're a traitor or not, or whether you betray your nation or not, or whether you believe in your nation. That in itself will be a massive step forward. And that comes, you're right on both sides, But the very people that have pursued that divisive language have to be honest, open and honest about the impact that's had on how people feel about public discourse across Scottish politics.
Angela, I'll come to you in a second. Just let me hear some more audience members. Man in the check shirt there. Yes.
Why is politics the way it is at the moment? What causes the toxicity amongst the politicians? Listen to the people and you might learn something, because we're getting ignored and you are going about there parading this and parading that and arguing with this and arguing with that. We're getting nowhere. This country's on its behind.
Angela Haggerty, what do you think is behind the toxicity in Scottish politics?
I think there's a few things going on, and it's not just about how individuals have decided to treat each other. I think there's a lot to do with the media and social media, what grabs headlines, and I think that can be influencing politicians' behaviour. It's good to hear some self-reflection on that. Maybe they're realising that they're playing into that game and that they have to stop it. The problem is, I don't actually have an awful lot of faith in them to stop it. You know, even having the debate here, it's not the first time we've had debates about toxicity in politics. This is not news to politicians. They deal with these issues, but they're still arguing over each other. They're still engaging in the same behaviour that we're all used to seeing.
But John Swinney says he's willing to change it, Angela.
Well, I did think that was quite convenient for John Swinney, who used to perhaps be a heckler. Now that he's going to be in the First Minister's seat, he thinks everybody should change their mind about how they're behaving. But regardless, but I mean, Anna, you know, you've set out some language there that's totally understandable. I agree with you. People shouldn't be called traitors or betraying their country because of their political views and all those things. But 50% of this population may believe in independence according to polls, and you're still using the word divisive every 5 minutes, putting it on election leaflets. Unionist parties do this routinely. You are by default accusing all of these people, as well as the SNP, of being divisive. You know, it seems as if politicians want to set out a list of conditions of this is how to engage respectfully in politics, and it just happens to align with the beliefs of my party. That's not how it works. It's really not. You have to have the respect across the board. You have to be grown up about this. And as much as we have all the right language, politicians will say the right things about being respectful and being civil and working together, it deteriorates very, very quickly. I don't know what the answer to this is. You know, the bickering, the heckling, the social media posts that politicians, I don't know how they get away with making them sometimes. These things grab headlines, they grab publicity. Politicians know that and they want that. And I don't know what incentive there is actually for them to stop trying to court attention in that way. I genuinely don't know what the answer to this is, but do I think that politics is suddenly going to stop being toxic and divisive because John Swinney has taken this position and encouraged it in others? I really am not convinced.
Okay, all right, your views on that from home this evening. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Tonight we're in Cumbernauld. Next week we're going to be in Perth. If you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for that show, just go to the address that is on your screen right now. It would be great to see you there. Let's go to question 3 tonight, which comes from Alana Kemp. Alana, evening.
How are you planning to tackle the cost of living crisis and families living in poverty, the price of baby milks, gas, electricity?
Thank you, Alana. Tell me a bit about your own situation and how it's
Well, I'm currently on
impacting
benefits. I've got a 4-month-old baby. I'm currently living with mum because I can't afford to move out. And it's a struggle. It's cheaper for me to borrow money than more like anything else, which borrowing money's a hassle.
Anna Sarwar, you talk about change a lot. Speak to Alana here. How would you change her life? How can you make her life better?
So a few specifics. One is we've got to make work pay. There are far too many people who are working every hour that God sends, but actually it's still not enough to make ends meet. And that's why one of the first things the Labour government would do is introduce a new deal for working people that would ban exploitative zero-hour contracts, end the scandal of fire and rehire, and make the minimum wage a genuine living wage, lifting people out of poverty and increasing tax receipts at the same time that can then be invested in our public services. Secondly, the energy crisis hasn't gone away, and I think we should continue to tax the excess profits of the oil and gas giants who are making £1 billion a week in profit. and we should put that money into investing in new technologies to bring down the cost of energy, as well as supporting you with your household bills.
But all that takes time. That takes a lot of time.
Well, actually, a new deal for working people doesn't take a lot of time. That is a piece of legislation that we say we will bring to the floor of the Parliament within 100 days. A windfall tax we can do immediately in the first budget of an incoming Labour government. And third, because you rightly mentioned around the circumstances, particularly for young people, is how do we get house building right across this country? That means attracting investment, sorting out our planning situation, and making sure we're building more homes across the country so people can have affordable homes, affordable rents if they can't afford to buy their own home, and make sure we're creating the financial circumstances where people can have the dream of home ownership. That requires economic stability and not having the car crash that we saw with the Liz Truss mini budget, where the average mortgage has gone up by £2,000 in Scotland a year. That's why we need stability, that's why we need change, and that's why we need to make work pay.
We'll hear about interest rates tomorrow, speculation they will be coming down ahead of economic figures on Friday that might show the UK coming out of recession. But is that how it feels for our audience here tonight? Man in the middle with his hand up. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear Anis talk about the New Deal for working people, considered how watered down it's been. Just before the show, Sharon Graham of the Unite Union tweeted out saying that they won't be engaging with you over it because of how much it's been watered down. Considering it's pretty much all consultation-based. I think it's shocking, really, and I think you have a cheek to talk about like benefits and stuff like that when you still support the two-child policy and won't roll back on the rape clause either.
I'll let you come back in, but I want some more audience views. Lady right at the back there, yes.
So, just on your point about making work pay, North Lanarkshire Council are currently in the process of removing school transport this year for secondary school children, next year for primary school children, up to the statutory 3-mile guidance. There's many holes in their argument. North Lanarkshire Council simply won't respond. We talk about listening. North Lanarkshire Council are not listening to parents. They're not listening to communities. They're basically saying that it's a parent's responsibility to get a child to school, which isn't incorrect. However, you're talking about parents are going to be left with a choice of getting their child safely to school through the safe walking routes, which aren't safe. If you live here, and you know some of the routes, they aren't safe, and I don't care what North Lanarkshire Council say, the routes aren't safe. They don't want to ask the police to get involved because they know the police will say they're not safe. You're looking for children as young as 11 to walk through wooded areas from 7:30 in the morning.
I know this is a hot issue here.
Yes.
What's your point?
So my point is, how do you expect parents to make sure their children get to their education safely and hold down a job at the same time?
OK, thank you. And lady with the blue hair. Yes.
I work for Citizens Advice Scotland, and we deal with fuel poverty as part of what we do. We are seeing an influx of people that are on sometimes full incomes and also 2 incomes that are actually reaching out to us for support, and we rely on stakeholders and shareholders. It's something that we have to do, but the staffing levels we have versus what we're being paid, what inflation's coming at. As someone who's worked for the charity for 2 years, I'm personally now struggling because of how mortgage has increased. The £100 that we get extra per month after our pay rise is not a dent. And as someone who now lives alone at 27 years old, the only reason I can afford my mortgage is by borrowing from friends and family when I have a full income. So what changes would be viable in the near future for people in my generation to be able to afford their own home, to not need fuel vouchers, to not need that extra help? When are we meant to be independent as people?
Jamie Hepburn. Well, talking about independence, when are we going to be independent as people, that lady says?
Well, there's a few things being said there. First of all, I must comment on the situation with the school bus changes. It's a local issue. I'm greatly concerned by it as well. I thought it was interesting. Anis earlier talked about the local council's budget. Actually, one of the things they've done recently with the extra money they've been given is, rather than investing it in that school transport, they've been putting it into the reserves rather than spending it on frontline services. I recognise the challenges that exist right now. What this government will do, what the Scottish government will do, will continue to take the steps it has. So it's put in place through a new social security agency, a range of new benefits. It's put in place the world-leading Scottish child payment. And I made the point earlier, these policies have led to 100,000 fewer children in poverty in Scotland than would otherwise be the case if we hadn't taken those steps. We'll continue to invest in social housing. £80 million for affordable housing announced the other day. We've built 125,000 and more affordable houses over the lifetime of this government. I'm afraid to say, though, and I'm going to bring it back to the Constitution, because there is a constitutional angle here. Much of what we have to do is mitigating against the mess that the United Kingdom government has put in place in respect of the economy and in respect of their approach to austerity. Now, we will continue to do what we can, but when push comes to shove, there's an upper limit to what we can do, and that's why I fundamentally believe in the requirement, the necessity for constitutional change.
Okay,
and actually going back to the point of amie,
just briefly,
Steve, just briefly, I thought the point was well made. Anis talks with great confidence about the New Deal for
backed
workers.
by the TUC, the STUC,
But we've just heard today Unite
across
out saying that they will not engage with that because they don't trust you with that, and well, they shouldn't trust you with that because you're reneging on policies left, right and centre. The notion that Labour is the prospect for change at this coming election
again, and this audience are asking questions about the cost of living crisis and what you are all going to do to make this easier for them. Angela Haggerty, you're a single parent. What do you see?
This is really hard. To the lady that asked the question, congratulations on your wee one. It's a lovely time having a child. My son's 4 now. But what's not pleasant is all this worrying. It's constant. I worry month to month about how we're getting by. I'm not planning for the future. I can't plan for a future. It just feels as though all of the things that might have felt like assurances to my parents, for example, when they had a job and they could have a house and basic things, doesn't feel like you have those assurances anymore. So it is really, really difficult. And I think we had how many years of austerity before we had Brexit, before we had a global pandemic. Our services had already been stripped so bare that when you have a big crisis like that or a huge political event like Brexit, then that's when you really see the cracks. That's when things start to fall apart. We're now in a situation where things have been allowed to get so broken that to put it back together is a huge, huge job. And it's an intimidating one, and it's one that requires bravery. You know, we talked about maybe looking at the profits of some of these companies, which is outrageous when you think of the struggles we have paying energy bills. If I hear one more headline about one of the energy giants making record profits, I'm going to scream. So we need some bravery in tackling that, I think. And it's just, I think when you have some of this culture war, identity politics squabbling, which probably relates a wee bit to the last question with the toxicity, I think some of those issues like gender recognition or trans rights or all, not to diminish these are important, very important issues for the people that it affects. But I think that sometimes politicians spend an incredible amount of time on issues that are actually affecting very small numbers of people because they're fearful of actually having to tackle these huge, huge issues when people like us are really struggling.
Gentleman with the beard in the middle.
So I work for I work for the largest housing association within the local area and one of the largest in Scotland. So I can see firsthand the effects poor housing has on people and the opportunities they have. What measures would you implement to tackle rising rents for very poor housing that are very unaffordable for local people who do work or are trying to better themselves?
Thank you. Alex Cole-Hamilton.
So, to go back to the original question, I mean, don't believe politicians that tell you or will try to persuade you that this can be solved just with money, with handouts and benefits. Now, the child payment we fully support, and it has helped a lot of families, but this isn't just about money. Let's remember, we've just been through 2 global economic shocks that really shouldn't have happened a century apart, but they happened within the last 3 years. That was a pandemic and then war in continental Europe, which has created massive inflation and all of the price rises that you're experiencing. We could come back to look on this period of our history with an dawning realization that we were already living in the early days of a new Cold War. Our world is a scarier place. These economic shocks will keep happening, whether that's through war, invasions, things like that. So there's little we can do with money to fix it, but there is stuff we can do with policy. First is on energy, and we can make it so that your fuel bills won't be as big as they were in the past. And how do we do that? By insulating every home in Scotland. We should have done that a long time ago. We might have then not had to jettison our climate targets.
But again, that's a long-term
No,
aspiration for people like
taken
Alana who are
together-
struggling with their bills right now.
If we instructed a national programme of public works, we could be well on our way into this within a year. The second thing is on public transport. Now, I heard about people about how do you get people from A to B? It's so much more expensive to run a car. The SNP Green government presided over 1 million fewer bus journeys a year since the pandemic. We need to reverse that. It's no good having free bus travel if you don't have a bus to get on, if there isn't a bus that serves your town or serves your village. That's an absolute easy win. We should be focusing on that because that helps with our climate obligations as well. And then there's growing the economy. How do we do that with skills? Now, the SNP have presided over the quiet death of further education in this country. They have axed hundreds of thousands of college places just at a time when this new industry of renewable technology is visiting itself on our shores, when we could ensnare that potential, that opportunity to be the Saudi Arabia of renewable technology that Alex Salmond promised. But why are people building wind farms offshore? Why are they sending the jobs to Portugal? We don't have the skilled workforce. We need to put 2 and 2 together here, invest in our colleges, give these training places, create that just transition, and actually give our young people some hope in this country.
Thank you. Gentleman down here.
Anna talks about change, but all these red lines, like the 2-child benefit cap, etc., are quickly slapped down by Sir Keir Starmer.
Not true.
Whether that be the next day or on stage that he shared with him. If Labour came to power in Scotland and Westminster and say the 2-child benefit cap, it's not affordable in England, would you then be slapped down and have to remove that thingy? If you're taking your orders, if you can't influence Westminster as the Scottish Labour Parliamentary Party, how are the people going to trust you to have a say? I know what it feels like for Westminster not to listen to me, but for your own party not to listen to you, why should you be trusted?
Who's in charge? You or Keir Starmer on this?
Well, first of all, I don't buy the premise of the question that somehow there is some grand masters for the Scottish people that tell them what they have to do. We can make decisions here in Scotland and be bold enough to make those decisions in Scotland. Actually, the Scottish Parliament could scrap the 2-child benefit cap in Scotland tomorrow if it wanted to, if that became a government priority. That's what part of devolving social security to Scotland gives us the power to do. I don't support the 2-child benefit cap. I'm on the record as saying we have to remove the 2-child benefit cap. Our UK party policy is to reform universal credit. That has to happen for me as fast as possible, as soon as the economic circumstances allow, and that must include the removal of the 2-child benefit cap. But the idea that this is as good as it gets, that 5 more years of Rishi Sunak, Suella Braverman, Liz Truss, Jacob Rees-Mogg is as good as the UK can do, and change won't come if we elect a UK Labour government that will be led by Keir Starmer as our Prime Minister, and then we actually get the Scottish Parliament working not in constant conflict with the UK, but in cooperation to maximise the delivery for people of Scotland. Let's stop pretending that somehow somebody is holding us back. Who's holding us back from reforming and renewing the NHS? It's the SNP holding us back. Who's holding us back from changing our education system? They are already independent.
Okay, you made your point. Lady down here.
Going back to the putting money into further education, the cutting of the buses for the transport for kids, 4th, 5th and 6th years are not going back to school because they're saying we're not walking 2 hours. We're not walking an hour to school and an hour back. Some of these kids have got extra jobs to support their families. So if the buses aren't put back on, you're not going to have to put money into further education because the kids aren't staying on.
Thank you. Gentleman of the beard.
That's not exactly why we're giving free bus passes to under 22-year-olds. As much as we're not giving them to school, we're giving them free bus passes to get to and from school.
All right.
But the bus passes only work if there's a bus that serves that area.
Yeah. Oh, Jamie Hepburn, on the point that Angela Haggerty was making there, have you put too much emphasis on social policy and not enough on economic policy?
No, I think if you go back to the point I've already made in relation to the achievements of the government in terms of reducing child poverty, 100,000 fewer children in poverty as a consequence of decisions we've made. That's a very clear focus on trying to tackle some of the very challenges of
but it's not
cost
enough
of living.
For Alana and other people that have spoken up here.
No, well, I appreciate that, and I have constituents in contact with me regularly about the challenges they face. But a lot of these challenges, frankly, stem from the fact of the mismanagement of the UK economy, and of course, there's been global challenges. But I presume even Alec would recognise it's been exacerbated and made worse by decisions made by the UK government, the mini-budget, the disaster zone that I spoke of earlier. We will continue to do what we can to mitigate against that, but frankly it is mitigation. If we leave powers in the hands of the UK government, we're going to continue to see these challenges with the economy.
No, hang on a second. Jamie Greene, it's down to the UK government. Jamie Hepburn says.
One of the biggest things that's come out of tonight's show is Jamie Hepburn seems to think that everything is everyone else's fault and it's got nothing to do with the SNP.
No, sorry.
We've been in government for the last...
No, let him finish the point.
Please let me finish.
Let him finish his point.
Your party has been in government for 17 years in this country, and I've listened to these people in this room tonight, and I've heard horror stories about education, colleges, cuts to public services, cuts to our council budgets, reduction in mental health support, problems in our schools. And all of these are devolved issues. Now, it's very easy to just blame somebody else for all of that. It's about time the SNP took some accountability and responsibility for what they've done in Scotland over the last 2 decades, and I hope they pay a price for that when there is an election. But I do want to come back to the original question, and that's what can we do right now? Well, many of the local services that you do rely on are funded by our local councils. Our local councils are on their knees financially. They're fast approaching having no money in the bank. They're making cuts left, right and centre to public services. And again, that's the responsibility of the SNP government, who fund local councils. And I know that in my area where I live, the local council have been closing libraries, they're closing public toilets, they're reducing the health and social care budgets. How can you make people's lives better when they're living in damp houses, which should have been replaced years ago, when they're going to schools with classrooms that are overcrowded, when there's no mental health support, when you have a drug pandemic on our streets, we've got rising crime and antisocial behaviour in some of our hard-hitting communities. And I'm afraid to say your government could have fixed all of this over the last decade.
Jamie Hepburn,
apologising to these
people. You can have the last word. You've got 30 seconds left.
Well, I'm afraid to say what we're hearing here is that we want others to spend a declining budget as a consequence of UK government spending decisions, spend it 3 or 4 times over. The reality is,
£500 million on 2 ferries that don't float.
As a consequence of decisions being taken elsewhere,
we are
struggling. Well, no, I'm sorry. I've also talked. I have talked about the achievements of the Scottish Government, achievements I'm proud of. There are record numbers of young people in positive destinations, 100,000 fewer children in poverty.
You've made that point
125,000.
Yes.
Zero contract is not a positive destination. You count that.
We don't seem to have made a huge progress in terms of the toxicity of the debate this evening, but hopefully we've shed some light for you this evening. We'll be in Perth for next week's show. If you want to join us there, just go to the website. The address is on your screen right now. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're on a bit later on BBC One Scotland. You can watch it again there, or you can catch it any time on the BBC iPlayer, and make sure that you download the podcast as well. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and to our audience in Cumbernauld for joining us. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well from all of us in Debate Night. Good night.